The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Katherine Davies stepped down onto the sun-baked street of Cody, Wyoming Territory, her calloused hands gripping the doorframe so hard her knuckles went white beneath the grime of 3 weeks' travel. She'd come west in 1883 with nothing but a carpetbag, a wedding dress she'd sewn herself, and hands that told the story of every brutal year she'd survived back in Pennsylvania's coal country. Preston Armstrong stood on the wooden walkway outside his ranch supply office, watching the stage arrive with a mixture of hope and dread coiling in his gut. He'd placed that advertisement 6 months ago in a moment of loneliness, never quite believing anyone would answer. But here she was, the woman whose letters had been practical and honest, speaking of hard work and partnership rather than romance. He'd appreciated that. He'd needed that. Katherine's eyes found him immediately. She'd memorized his description from those careful letters written in surprisingly elegant script. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. 28 years old, owner of a modest cattle ranch 10 miles outside town. No family left, looking for a wife who understood that life out here demanded strength. She stepped forward, and he moved to meet her, both of them stopping an awkward distance apart. Up close, Preston saw a woman of 24 with auburn hair pulled back severely, green eyes that assessed everything with quick intelligence, and a face that might have been called pretty if it wasn't drawn so tight with exhaustion and weariness. Her dress was clean but patched in several places, the work done with meticulous care. "Miss Davies." His voice came out rougher than he'd intended. "Mr. Armstrong." She extended her hand for a businesslike shake, not a delicate offering to be kissed. When their palms met, Preston felt the hardened ridges of calluses, the rough texture of skin that had known years of manual labor. Her grip was firm, direct. Most men would have recoiled or made some comment. Preston had seen men laugh at women with working hands, as if femininity could only exist in softness. But he looked down at their joined hands and then up at Katherine's face, which had tensed for judgment or disgust. Instead, he brought her hand up and pressed his lips to those work-roughened knuckles with genuine reverence. "These are strong hands," he said quietly. "Good hands. Honest hands." Katherine's eyes widened, and for just a moment the wariness cracked to reveal something vulnerable underneath. She'd spent 3 weeks preparing herself for disappointment, for a man who would take one look at her and realize he'd made a mistake. She was no delicate flower, no soft city girl looking for adventure. She was used up and worn down, and her hands showed it. "They're ugly hands," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's what my brothers always said. Your brothers were fools." Preston still held her hand gently. "These hands tell me you know what work means, that you won't turn away from what needs doing. That's worth more than softness out here, Miss Davies. That's worth everything." The stagecoach driver cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Got her trunk here, Armstrong. Where you want it." The next hour passed in a blur of practical arrangements. Preston loaded Katherine's single trunk onto his wagon while she retrieved her carpetbag. The trunk was surprisingly light, and when he glanced at her questioningly, she simply said, "I didn't have much worth bringing." Reverend Miller had agreed to perform the ceremony that afternoon in the small church on the edge of town. Preston had thought Katherine might want time to rest, to see the ranch first, to change her mind if she needed to. But she'd been firm in her letters that she wanted the marriage done properly and quickly. She wasn't coming west to play at courtship. She was coming to build a life, and she wanted the legal protection of marriage before she set foot on his property as anything other than his wife. The church was simple, whitewashed wood with a modest steeple. Inside, The afternoon light slanted through plain glass windows, catching dust motes in golden shafts. Martha Henderson, the Reverend's wife, had agreed to stand as witness, along with Samuel Tucker, who managed the general store and served as Cody's unofficial mayor. Katherine excused herself to change in the back room, emerging 15 minutes later in her wedding dress. Preston's breath caught. The dress was simple calico, pale blue with tiny white flowers, but every stitch was perfect. The bodice fit her slim frame exactly, and the skirt fell in clean lines to the floor. She'd done something with her hair, pinning it up in a softer style that showed the elegant line of her neck. "Did you make that yourself?" Martha asked, her voice warm with admiration. "Yes, madam. Took me for months, working by lamplight after my shift at the laundry." Katherine smoothed her hands over the skirt, and Preston saw they were trembling slightly. She'd scrubbed them clean, but the calluses remained, telling their story against the delicate fabric. The ceremony was brief. Reverend Miller spoke about partnership and dedication, about the challenges of life on the frontier and the strength required to build something lasting. Preston made his vows in a steady voice, meaning every word. When Katherine spoke hers, her voice was soft but clear, her green eyes meeting his directly. "I do," she said, and Preston slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. It had been his mother's, the only piece of jewelry he had left from his family. Katherine looked down at it, tears suddenly bright in her eyes. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Miller said with a gentle smile. Preston stepped closer, giving Katherine time to pull away if she wanted. But she tilted her face up to his, and he kissed her softly, carefully, their first kiss tasting of hope and uncertainty, and the beginning of something neither of them quite understood yet. Martha insisted on hosting a small supper for them at the parsonage, refusing to let them leave town without a proper wedding meal. It was simple fare but generous: roasted chicken, fresh bread, butter, and apple pie. Katherine ate with the careful attention of someone who'd known real hunger, savoring every bite. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, Preston helped Katherine into the wagon for the journey to the ranch. The 10 miles of dirt road stretched ahead of them, and Preston kept the horses to a steady walk, not wanting to jostle Katherine too roughly after her long journey. "Tell me about the ranch," Katherine said after they'd ridden in silence for a while. "Your letters mentioned cattle, but not much else." Preston appreciated that she was asking practical questions, not making awkward small talk. 200 head right now, mostly Herefords. I've got 500 acres, about half of it good grazing land. There's a creek that runs through the property, never goes dry even in summer. House is small, just 4 rooms, but it's solid. I built it myself 6 years ago when I first claimed the land. You have help, hired men. 1 full-time hand, Jesse Martinez. He lives in the bunkhouse. Good man, hard worker. His family has a homestead about 20 miles south. He sends most of his pay back to them. Katherine nodded, absorbing this information. "What will you need from me? Besides the cooking and household work, I mean." The question surprised Preston. Most women would have assumed the domestic work was all that would be expected. "Can you ride?" "No, never had occasion to learn. I can teach you. It's important out here in case of emergency. Can you shoot?" "A little. My father had an old rifle. He taught me basic aim before he died." "We'll practice. Not that I expect trouble, but it's good to be prepared." Preston glanced at her profile in the fading light. "What kind of work did you do back in Pennsylvania?" Katherine was quiet for a moment, and Preston wondered if he'd touched a nerve. Finally, she spoke. "My father died in a mine collapse when I was 12. After that, it was just my mother, my 3 brothers, and me. Mother took in washing. I helped her until I was 14, then got hired on at the commercial laundry in town. Worked there 10 years. 10 years of brutal labor in a steaming laundry, breathing harsh chemical fumes, hands in water so hot it burned. Preston understood now why her hands were so calloused, why she carried herself with that particular exhaustion of someone who'd worked too hard for too long. "Your mother." "Your brothers?" he asked gently. "Mother died 3 years ago. Lungs gave out from all the steam and chemicals. My brothers all got married. Their wives didn't want me around, eating their food, taking up space. Can't say I blamed them. Times are hard for everyone." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Preston heard the hurt underneath. "Their loss is my gain," he said firmly. "A woman who knows hard work, who doesn't complain, who can stitch like you clearly can. That's exactly the kind of partner I need out here." Katherine turned to look at him fully for the first time since they'd left town. "Why didn't you marry someone local? Surely there are women in Cody or the surrounding ranches who would have had you. You own land, you're established. That counts for a lot." Preston considered his answer carefully. "The women around here who are looking to marry mostly want something I can't give them. They want a big house in town, want their husband to give up ranching and become a shopkeeper or a banker. They want easy lives, and I don't blame them for that. But I love this land. I love working it, building something from nothing. I needed someone who understood that life out here isn't easy, but it's good. Your letters told me you understood the difference." "What did I say that convinced you?" Katherine's voice was curious. "You wrote about your mother's garden. How even though you were all dirt poor and exhausted, she kept that little patch of vegetables and flowers behind your house. You wrote about how she'd stand out there in the evening, just looking at what she'd grown, and how her face would go peaceful. You said that was the only time she ever looked truly happy. That told me you understood about finding satisfaction in building something, even when it's hard." Katherine's eyes glistened. "I'd forgotten I wrote that, but yes, that garden meant everything to her. She died in winter, and I think part of her gave up because she knew she wouldn't see another growing season. The sun had fully set by the time the ranch house came into view. Preston had left a lamp burning in the window, and its warm glow beckoned them home. The house was simple rough-hewn logs with a covered porch, but it was well built and maintained. A barn stood nearby, and Preston could hear the cattle lowing in the distance. He helped Katherine down from the wagon, and she stood looking at the house for a long moment. "It's a good house," she said finally. "Solid. Come inside. I'll get your trunk later." The front door opened into a main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a black cast iron stove beside it for cooking. Simple furniture filled the space. A wooden table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, shelves holding basic supplies and a few books. Everything was clean but spare, the home of a man who spent most of his time outdoors. "Bedrooms through there," Preston said, pointing to a door on the left. "That other door leads to a small room I've been using for storage, but it could be a nursery someday, or a sewing room, whatever you'd like. And there's a bathing room off the back, just big enough for a tub. Creek water, but I can heat it on the stove." Katherine walked slowly through the space, trailing her fingers along the table, examining the shelves. Preston watched her anxiously, trying to see the place through her eyes. It was humble compared to what she might have hoped for, but it was clean and functional. "You keep it neat," she observed. "I try. Living alone, you either stay organized or you lose your mind." She turned to face him, and the lamplight caught her features softly. Without the harsh sunlight, she looked younger, less worn down. "Preston, I need to be clear with you about something. I came here for practical reasons. I needed a way out of a life that was grinding me down to nothing. You needed a wife. This is a business arrangement, a partnership. I'll work hard, I'll be a good wife to you, but I can't promise you love. I don't know if I have that in me anymore." Preston had expected this conversation, had thought about what he'd say. "I'm not asking for promises about feelings, Katherine. Feelings come or they don't. What I'm asking for is honesty, effort, and time. Let's build this partnership first. Everything else can sort itself out naturally." Relief flickered across her face. "That's fair. That's more than fair. You must be exhausted. Why don't you wash up and get some rest? The bedroom is yours tonight. I'll bed down out here. Preston, this is your house. I can't take your bed on our first night. You've been traveling for 3 weeks. You need a proper rest. Besides, I've slept plenty of nights on that rocking chair when I had sick cattle to watch. It's comfortable enough." He moved toward the door before she could argue further. "I'm going to tend to the horses and bring in your trunk. Towels are on the shelf by the bathing room, and there's a clean nightdress in the bedroom. It was my mother's. I thought you might need it." Before Katherine could respond, he was out the door, needing the cool night air and a moment to collect his thoughts. His hands trembled slightly as he unhitched the horses. He'd done it. He was married. This practical, exhausted, beautiful woman was his wife. Inside, Katherine found the bathing room and heated water on the stove. The tub was simple tin, but the water was blissfully hot. She sank into it with a groan, letting 3 weeks of travel, dirt, and exhaustion soak away. Her body ached in 1,000 places, but beneath the exhaustion was a tiny spark of something she was afraid to name. Hope, maybe, or possibility. She examined her hands in the lamplight. The calluses were permanent, she knew. Years of harsh work had marked her indelibly. But Preston had kissed them, had called them strong. Not ugly, not shameful, but strong. A knock at the door startled her. "Trunk's inside when you're ready," Preston's voice called. "I'm going to check the barn, then I'll come back and bank the fire." "Thank you," she called back, and heard his footsteps retreat. The nightdress he'd mentioned was soft flannel, worn but clean and carefully mended. Katherine put it on and found it fit reasonably well. Preston's mother must have been about her size. She wondered about the woman who'd worn this before her, who'd lived in this house, who'd raised the man who'd just kissed her calloused hands with such gentleness. The bedroom was small but cozy, with a large bed covered in quilts, a dresser, and a small table beside the bed holding another lamp. A window looked out toward the mountains, and Katherine could see stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds. She climbed into bed, intending to wait for Preston to return so she could thank him properly for his kindness. But exhaustion dragged her down like a weight, and within minutes, she was deeply asleep. Preston came back an hour later to find the house quiet. He checked the bedroom door, saw Katherine curled on her side under the quilts, auburn hair spread across the pillow. Her face in sleep looked younger, peaceful, the lines of worry smoothed away. He closed the door quietly and settled into the rocking chair with a blanket. It wasn't the most comfortable arrangement, but he'd slept in worse places. Outside, an owl called, and cattle shifted in their sleep. Preston closed his eyes and let the familiar sounds of his ranch lull him toward rest. They'd figure this out, he told himself. One day at a time, one step at a time. They'd build something good here. He had to believe that. Morning came early, with roosters crowing and cattle beginning to stir. Preston woke stiff from the rocking chair and immediately set about building up the fire and starting coffee. He'd mixed biscuit dough and had them in the oven when Katherine emerged from the bedroom, already dressed in a simple work dress of brown homespun. "You should have woken me," she said, looking guilty. "It's my job to make breakfast. You needed rest. Besides, I've been making my own breakfast for years. I'm not going to collapse if I do it one more day." He poured her coffee. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months." "That bed is wonderful." She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the tin cup. Preston, about sleeping arrangements, I've been thinking. This is a working ranch. You need proper rest. We can share the bed. I trust you to be a gentleman. Preston felt heat rise in his face. Katherine, I don't want you to feel pressured about anything. We can take our time with all of that. I'm being practical. There's no sense in you sleeping in a chair when there's a perfectly good bed. We're married. People share beds. We don't have to do anything but sleep. Her voice was matter of fact, but Preston caught a hint of nervousness underneath. If you're sure, I appreciate it. That chair was less comfortable than I remembered. He pulled the biscuits from the oven, golden and steaming. Can you cook much? Basic things. Stews, bread, simple meals. We didn't have money for fancy ingredients, so I learned to make a lot from a little. My mother was better at it than I am. Well, I eat to live rather than live to eat. So basic and filling sounds perfect. They ate breakfast as the sun rose, painting the mountains pink and gold. Preston explained the day's work. He needed to ride out and check the herd, repair some fence line, and meet with Jesse to discuss moving some cattle to fresh grazing. Katherine listened carefully, asking questions about the ranch operations. What can I do to help? She asked. Besides the house, I mean. Today, just settle in, learn where everything is. There's a root cellar behind the house with preserved goods. The hen house is past the barn. Chickens need feeding and eggs collecting. The vegetable garden is small, but it needs weeding. Whatever you feel up to. I can handle all that and more. Just show me what needs doing. Preston found himself smiling. You really don't know how to take it easy, do you? Never learned. Never had the luxury. But she smiled back, and Preston thought that smile transformed her face completely. After breakfast, Preston showed Katherine around the property. The hen house held a dozen chickens, currently clucking their displeasure at the late morning intrusion. The root cellar was well stocked with preserves, dried beans, flour, sugar, and other staples. The garden was overgrown with weeds, the vegetables struggling to compete. I've neglected this, Preston admitted. By the time I finish ranch work each day, I barely have energy to eat, let alone garden. Katherine knelt beside a struggling tomato plant, her fingers gently pulling weeds. This needs attention, but it's not past saving. I can get this producing properly again. Jesse Martinez rode up as they were finishing the tour. He was a lean man in his early 20s with dark eyes, a quick smile, and an easy way with horses. He doffed his hat when he saw Katherine. You must be Mrs. Armstrong. Preston told me you'd be arriving. Welcome to the ranch. Thank you, Jesse. Please call me Katherine. Yes, madam, Mrs. Katherine. He turned to Preston. We've got a problem with the fence line on the north pasture. Looks like something big pushed through it. Might have been a bear. Preston's expression turned serious. Show me. Katherine, will you be all right here? I'll be fine. I have plenty to keep me busy. Preston wanted to tell her to stay inside, to be careful, but he caught himself. She was a grown woman who'd survived years of hard labor. She didn't need him hovering. We'll be back by late afternoon. If you need anything, there's a rifle above the door and a bell on the porch. Ring it if there's trouble and we'll hear it. After the men rode off, Katherine stood in the yard, looking around at her new home. The morning sun was already warm, promising a hot day. The mountains rose in the distance, snow-capped and magnificent. The air smelled of sage and pine and something wild and free that she'd never encountered in Pennsylvania's coal country. She'd married a stranger and traveled 2,000 miles to live in the middle of nowhere. It should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in years, she felt something almost like excitement. This was hers now. This house, this land, this life. She could build something here. She could become someone new. Katherine started with the garden, spending the morning on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds and assessing damage. The work was familiar and soothing. Sweat dripped down her back and her hands quickly became dirty, but she didn't mind. This was good, honest work with visible results. By midday, she'd cleared half the garden and collected 24 eggs from the henhouse. She made herself lunch from leftover biscuits and some preserved jam, then started on the house. Preston kept it neat, but it needed a woman's deeper attention. She swept floors, washed windows, organized the kitchen supplies, and beat the dust from the rugs. As she worked, she thought about Preston. He wasn't what she'd expected, though she wasn't entirely sure what she had expected. Someone gruff, perhaps. Someone who saw her as a transaction, a solution to a problem. Instead, he'd been kind, gentle. He'd kissed her work-worn hands and called them strong. The memory sent an unfamiliar warmth through her chest. Katherine had given up on romance years ago, had learned to see marriage as an economic necessity rather than a source of happiness. Her parents' marriage had been loving once, but poverty had ground that love down to exhaustion and bitter endurance. She'd watched her mother work herself to death, while her father drank himself into the grave a bit at a time before the mine collapse finally finished the job. Katherine had promised herself she'd never end up like her mother, worn down and used up. But the laundry had been wearing her down just as surely, just more slowly. This marriage was her escape, her chance at something different. She couldn't let herself hope for love. Hope was dangerous, but partnership, mutual respect, building something together, that seemed possible. That seemed real. Preston and Jessie returned in late afternoon, dusty and tired. They'd repaired the fence line and found bare tracks, but the animal had moved on. Preston's eyes went wide when he stepped into the house and saw the transformation Katherine had wrought in a single day. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, looking around at the gleaming surfaces, the organized shelves, the fresh flowers Katherine had cut from the wildflowers growing near the creek. "I wanted to. It's my home now. I wanted to feel like it." Katherine was stirring a pot on the stove, something that smelled savory and delicious. "Supper will be ready in about 30 minutes. I found salt pork and beans in the cellar and made a stew." Jessie grinned at Preston. "You got yourself a good one, boss. My mama would like her already." That night, after Jessie had returned to the bunkhouse and Katherine had cleaned up from supper, she and Preston prepared for bed with awkward formality. Preston changed in the main room while Katherine used the bedroom, and when he entered, she was already under the covers on one side of the bed, leaving him plenty of space. He blew out the lamp and climbed in carefully, staying as far to his side as possible. The bed was big enough that they didn't touch, but Preston was acutely aware of Katherine's presence, her breathing, the warmth radiating from her side of the mattress. "Preston," her voice came soft in the darkness. "Yes, thank you for today, for everything, for being kind." "You don't have to thank me for basic decency, Katherine. You'd be surprised how rare it is." She was quiet for a moment. "The men at the laundry used to make comments about my hands, called me mannish, said no man would want a woman who looked like she'd been working like a mule." Preston felt anger flare in his chest. Those men were idiots. There's nothing mannish about you. You're strong, and there's a difference. Is there? Sometimes I wonder if I've lost something by working so hard, if I've become something other than what a woman should be. Preston rolled onto his side, wishing he could see her face in the darkness. What should a woman be, Katherine? Soft and helpless, unable to survive without a man to take care of her. That's not strength, that's dependence. You've taken care of yourself and helped take care of your family. You've survived things that would break most people. That doesn't make you less of a woman, it makes you extraordinary. He heard her breath catch, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "No one has ever called me that before." "Then you've been surrounded by fools your whole life." He wanted to reach across the space between them to offer comfort, but he didn't want to overstep. "Get some rest, Catherine. Tomorrow's another day of work." "Good night, Preston." "Good night." The days fell into a rhythm. Preston rose before dawn to tend the cattle, and Catherine woke with him to make breakfast. They ate together in the early morning light, planning the day's work. Preston would ride out with Jessie while Catherine tended the house, the garden, and the chickens. She proved to be exactly what Preston had hoped for: capable, hardworking, and unafraid of challenges. Within a week, the garden was thriving under her care. She'd reorganized the root cellar, mended all of Preston's worn shirts, and had even started teaching herself to ride on one of the gentler horses during the afternoon when the worst heat had passed. Preston would return each evening to a clean house, a good meal, and Catherine's quiet company. They talked about the ranch, about the work that needed doing, about small observations from their day. Catherine told him about the hawk that had tried to get into the hen house and how she'd scared it off. Preston told her about a new calf being born, about Jesse's jokes, about his plans for expanding the herd next year. They shared the bed each night, maintaining careful distance, but growing more comfortable with the intimacy of sleeping beside another person. Preston learned that Catherine sometimes had nightmares and would wake gasping. He learned to murmur soft reassurances until her breathing steadied. Catherine learned that Preston talked in his sleep sometimes, usually about cattle or fence repairs, which she found endearing. 2 weeks after Catherine's arrival, they made the trip into Cody for supplies. It was Catherine's first time back in town since her wedding day, and Preston noticed how people stared. Small towns were hungry for gossip, and his mail-order bride was prime material. At the general store, Martha Henderson greeted Catherine warmly. "How are you settling in, dear? Is Preston treating you well?" "Very well, thank you. The ranch is beautiful." "I'm so glad. We were all curious, you know. Preston's been alone for so long, we'd begun to think he preferred it that way." Martha lowered her voice conspiratorially. "There were at least 3 local girls who tried to catch his eye over the years. He never seemed interested." Catherine wasn't sure how to respond to that. Before she could formulate an answer, another woman approached. She was beautiful in a delicate way, with blonde ringlets and a fashionable dress that must have cost more than Catherine had earned in a year at the laundry. "So you're the mail-order bride," the woman said, looking Catherine up and down with undisguised disdain. How desperate Preston must have been. Martha's face flushed with anger. "Vivian Caldwell, that is uncalled for." "Is it? I'm simply stating facts." "What kind of woman has to advertise for a husband?" Vivian's blue eyes were cold. "A desperate one. One who couldn't catch a man any other way." Catherine felt old wounds open, but she kept her voice steady. "The kind of woman who values honesty and partnership over games and manipulation." "If that makes me desperate, so be it. Partnership." Vivian laughed, a brittle sound. "Is that what you call it? How convenient for Preston, getting a cook and housekeeper who comes with marital obligations." "That's enough." Preston's voice cut through the tension. He'd been at the feed store and had entered just in time to hear Vivian's last comment. His face was dark with anger. "Vivian, you will apologize to my wife, or you and your father can find somewhere else to buy your supplies. I'm sure Samuel would be happy to lose your business if it means maintaining basic civility in his store." Samuel Tucker, who'd been pretending not to listen from behind the counter, nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. We don't tolerate rudeness here, Miss Caldwell." Vivian's face went pale, then red. "You choose her over me, after everything?" "There was never an everything between us, Vivian. You made it clear you wanted a businessman husband who'd live in town. I made it equally clear that wasn't me. That was 5 years ago. Let it go." Vivian's eyes glittered with tears of rage and humiliation. "You'll regret this, Preston Armstrong. Her hands are rough as tree bark. She looks like a farmhand, not a lady. You could have had so much better." Preston crossed the store in 3 strides and took Catherine's hand, holding it up so the calluses caught the light streaming through the window. Then, deliberately, he brought her hand to his lips and kissed each rough knuckle. "These hands are honest hands, working hands, strong hands. They're worth more than all your soft, useless prettiness, Vivian." His voice rang through the store, ensuring everyone heard. "Katherine is exactly the wife I wanted, exactly the partner I needed. And if you ever speak to her with such disrespect again, you'll answer to me." The store had gone completely silent. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. No one had ever defended her like that. No one had ever stood up for her with such conviction. Vivian fled the store, skirts rustling. The moment she was gone, conversation resumed, people suddenly very interested in their shopping. Martha squeezed Catherine's arm. "That was long overdue. Vivian's been insufferable since Preston turned her down. Good for you both." On the ride back to the ranch, Katherine sat close to Preston on the wagon seat, their shoulders nearly touching. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did back there. I meant every word. Vivian Caldwell is everything I don't want in a wife. Concerned with appearances, with status, with being seen as proper and genteel. There's nothing wrong with those things, but they're not for me. I need someone real. Someone who understands what matters out here. Still, it must have been hard. She's beautiful." Preston looked at her, really looked at her in the afternoon sunlight. "So are you, Katherine. You just don't see it. You're beautiful in a way that lasts, that means something. The kind of beauty that comes from character and strength." Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from something deeper and more complex. Something that felt dangerously like the beginning of actual feeling for this man beside her. That night, when they climbed into bed, Katherine didn't stay on her far edge of the mattress. She moved closer, not quite touching, but near enough that Preston could feel the warmth of her presence. His heart hammered in his chest, but he didn't move away. "Preston," her voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes, what you said today about me being beautiful. Did you mean it, or were you just trying to put Vivian in her place?" Preston gathered his courage. "I meant it. I've thought you were beautiful since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach. You have this way of looking at the world like you're seeing it fresh, like you're grateful for every good thing even though life hasn't been kind to you. That's beautiful to me, and your hands." He found her hand under the covers, threading his fingers through hers. "These hands tell your story. They tell me who you are. I love them." Catherine's breath hitched. "I think I'm starting to have feelings for you, real feelings. I wasn't going to let myself, but I don't think I can help it." "Good." Preston's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Because I've been falling for you since the day you arrived. Every meal you cook, every improvement you make to the house, every time you tackle something new without complaining. Watching you learn to ride, seeing you in the garden with dirt on your face and satisfaction in your eyes. Katherine, you're exactly what I needed. You make this house a home." She turned onto her side to face him, and even in the darkness he could make out the shine of her eyes. "I want to be a real wife to you, Preston, not just a housekeeper or a business partner. I want this to be a real marriage." Preston's heart felt too large for his chest. "Are you sure? We can take all the time you need." "I'm sure. I trust you. I think I might even love you, though I'm still figuring out what that feels like." Preston cupped her face gently, feeling her lean into his touch. "We'll figure it out together." He kissed her then, properly this time, not the chaste brush of lips from their wedding day, but a real kiss full of tenderness and promise and the beginning of passion. Katherine responded hesitantly at first, Then with growing confidence, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "We don't have to rush anything. I know. But I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of holding back. I want to live, Preston. Really live, not just survive. I want to build this life with you completely." They came together that night with gentle exploration, learning each other's bodies and boundaries, discovering pleasure in partnership. Preston was patient and careful, making sure Katherine felt safe and cherished. And Katherine, who'd armored her heart for so long, finally let those walls come down. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, Preston's arm around Katherine's waist, her head on his chest. "I never thought I could have this," she whispered. "This kind of happiness, this kind of peace. You deserve it, Katherine. You deserve everything good this world has to offer, so do you." She pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "Thank you for seeing me. For seeing past the rough exterior to who I really am." "You're not rough, you're strong. There's a difference," she smiled against his skin. "You keep saying that, because it keeps being true." The weeks turned into months, and the ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Katherine's garden produced abundantly, more vegetables than they could eat. She started preserving and pickling, filling the root cellar with jars of tomatoes, pickles, and jams. She also started selling the excess in town, building a small but steady income that made her glow with pride. Preston expanded the herd with Katherine's savings contribution, and they hired another hand, a quiet man named Thomas who'd lost his own homestead to a bad winter. The ranch was growing, prospering, becoming everything Preston had dreamed it could be. But more than the material success, Preston treasured the relationship growing between him and Katherine. She'd relaxed into life on the ranch, her face losing that pinched, exhausted look. She laughed more, smiled easily, and had developed a playful side that delighted him. She'd hide his hat and make him search for it, or sneak up behind him when he was working and startle him. In turn, Preston showed Katherine the land he loved, taking her on long rides to his favorite spots. He showed her the meadow where wildflowers bloomed in spring, the high pasture with views for miles, the spot by the creek where eagles nested. He taught her to shoot properly, and she turned out to be a natural, her steady hands and good eye making her accurate even at distance. As autumn approached and the air turned crisp, they prepared for winter. Preston and the hands harvested hay and reinforced the barn. Katherine finished her preserving and sewed warm quilts and heavy curtains. Together, they cut and stacked firewood, building a massive pile that would last through the coldest months. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Katherine placed Preston's hand on her stomach. "I think I'm with child," she said quietly. Preston's eyes went wide. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. I've missed my monthly courses twice now, and I've been feeling sick in the mornings. Martha Henderson confirmed it yesterday when we went to town." Joy flooded through Preston so intensely it almost hurt. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy? I know we haven't been married long and there's still so much work to do on the ranch." "Happy." Preston pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "Katherine, I'm beyond happy. I'm ecstatic. A baby, our baby." She relaxed against him, her head finding that perfect spot on his shoulder. "I'm scared. My mother had such hard births, and out here so far from town from a doctor. Martha is an experienced midwife. She's delivered dozens of babies. And we'll make sure everything is ready, that you're cared for properly. You're not going to go through this alone." "I know. That's what scares me less than it might. I'm not alone anymore. I have you." Winter came hard and early that year. By November, snow blanketed the ranch and temperatures plunged below zero. But the house was warm and well-stocked, and Preston found he loved the enforced intimacy of winter. They'd spend long evenings by the fire, Katherine sewing baby clothes while Preston read aloud from books or worked on tack repair. Katherine's belly grew steadily. By Christmas, she was definitely showing, and her face had taken on that particular glow of pregnancy. Preston loved watching her unconsciously touch her stomach, loved feeling the baby move under his palm at night. They celebrated Christmas simply but joyfully. Preston had carved a small rocking horse for the baby, working on it secretly in the barn. Katherine had knitted him thick wool socks and a scarf, the stitches perfect and even. They'd invited Jesse and Thomas to share Christmas dinner, and the four of them ate roasted chicken and Katherine's apple pie, laughing and sharing stories. "You seem happy, boss," Jesse observed as they cleaned up after the meal. "Different than before Katherine came." "I am happy. Happier than I ever thought possible." Preston looked through the doorway to where Katherine was showing Thomas the baby clothes she'd made, her face animated. "She changed everything, Jesse. Made me realize I was just going through motions before, not really living. That's how it should be. That's how my parents are, still in love after 25 years. Jesse clapped Preston on the shoulder. "You found a good one, I know. Best decision I ever made, placing that advertisement." January and February were brutal. Several blizzards kept them housebound for days at a time. The hands stayed in the bunkhouse, only venturing out to check on the cattle and clear paths. Preston worried constantly about the herd, about the feed lasting, about keeping everyone safe. But Katherine remained calm and steady, her presence a constant reassurance. She kept the house warm and comfortable, cooked hearty meals, and never complained even as her pregnancy made her increasingly uncomfortable. When Preston lay awake at night worrying, she'd stroke his hair and remind him that he'd prepared well, that they'd weather this winter like they'd weather everything else, together. Spring came late, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, revealing green grass beneath. The creek ran high and cold with snowmelt. Wildflowers began to push through the ground, and the cattle, thin from the hard winter, began to regain weight on fresh grazing. Katherine's time was approaching. She'd grown large with the baby, her belly round and tight, her movements slow and careful. Martha came to stay at the ranch in early April, preparing for the birth. "Could be any day now," Martha said after examining Katherine. "Baby's in position and you're as ready as you can be. How are you feeling?" "Huge. Uncomfortable. Ready to meet this child," Katherine said with a tired smile. She was in the rocking chair Preston had positioned by the window so she could watch the spring unfold. Preston was a nervous wreck. He threw himself into work, trying to keep busy, but his mind was always on Katherine and the coming baby. Jesse and Thomas handled most of the heavy work, shooing Preston back to the house whenever they caught him staring off into space. Labor began on a beautiful April morning when apple blossoms were just beginning to open. Katherine woke Preston before dawn with a hand on his shoulder. "It's time." The pain started about an hour ago. Preston shot out of bed, immediately panicking. "An hour? Why didn't you wake me sooner? What do you need?" "Should I get Martha?" Preston breathed. "Martha is already awake. She's heating water and preparing supplies. First babies take a long time." "We have hours yet." But she gripped his hand hard as another contraction rolled through her. Martha took charge with calm efficiency. She got Katherine walking, then resting, then walking again. As the sun rose higher and the contractions grew stronger, Preston stayed by Katherine's side, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. "I can't do this," Katherine gasped during a particularly hard contraction. "It's too much." "Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I know. Preston kissed her sweaty forehead. Those strong hands, remember. That strength goes all the way through you. You can do this. Hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. The sun reached its zenith and began to sink toward the mountains. Katherine was exhausted, her strength flagging. Martha's face grew concerned. "The baby's stuck," she said quietly to Preston while Katherine dozed between contractions. "Not badly, but enough that this is taking too long. She's been laboring for 14 hours. She's wearing out." Fear gripped Preston's heart. "What can we do?" Keep encouraging her. "When the next contraction comes, she needs to push harder than she ever has. One big effort might do it." Preston knelt beside Katherine as she roused. "Katherine, look at me, listen. I know you're tired. I know this is hard. But you need to dig deep and find that strength I know you have. Those hands that worked 10-hour days in the laundry. Those arms that hauled water and wrung out heavy, wet clothes. That back that bent over the garden in the hot sun. You have so much strength, and I need you to use every bit of it now. Can you do that for me? For our baby." Katherine looked at him with exhausted eyes, but he saw determination kindle there. "I can do it." The next contraction built, and Katherine bore down with everything she had. Martha coached her through it, and Preston supported her back, lending her his strength. Katherine screamed with the effort, a primal sound of determination and desperation. "I see the head." "Again, Katherine, push again." Martha's voice was urgent with excitement. Another contraction, another enormous push, and suddenly there was a slippery rush and a tiny, furious cry. Martha lifted a squalling, red-faced infant. "It's a boy, a beautiful, healthy boy." Katherine collapsed back against Preston, sobbing with relief and joy and exhaustion. "A boy. We have a son." Preston couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He watched Martha clean and swaddle the baby with expert hands, and then she was placing the tiny bundle in Katherine's arms. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused dark eyes, making small snuffling sounds. "He's perfect," Katherine whispered, touching the soft dark hair, the tiny fingers that immediately gripped hers with surprising strength. "Look, Preston, look at him." Preston looked at his son, this tiny person who was half him and half Katherine, all possibility and promise. "What should we name him?" They discussed names during the long winter months. Katherine had wanted to honor Preston's parents, and Preston had agreed. "Peter, after your father." "Peter Armstrong." Preston tested the name, feeling it fit perfectly. "Hello, Peter. Welcome to the world, son." The days after Peter's birth passed in a haze of sleeplessness and wonder. The baby needed constant feeding and attention, and Katherine was sore and healing. But Preston had never seen her happier. Despite her exhaustion, she glowed with maternal joy, singing to Peter as she nursed him, watching him sleep with an expression of such fierce love it made Preston's heart ache. He helped however he could, changing diapers, walking Peter when he fussed at night, bringing Katherine meals and making sure she rested. Jesse and Thomas took on extra ranch work without complaint, genuinely happy for their boss's new family. As Katherine recovered and Peter grew from a tiny newborn into a slightly less tiny infant, family life settled into a new rhythm. Preston would wake to Peter's hungry cries before dawn, bringing the baby to Katherine to nurse while he started coffee. After breakfast, Katherine would settle Peter in a basket near wherever she was working, and the baby would sleep or watch with dark, curious eyes as his mother tended the garden or cooked or cleaned. Preston found excuses to come back to the house more often, just to watch his wife and son, to marvel at what they'd created together. Katherine would catch him staring and shake her head with a smile. "You have work to do, Preston Armstrong. I know. But looking at you two is better than any work." "Sentimental fool," she'd say fondly, but her eyes would be soft. Summer arrived in full glory, and the ranch prospered. The herd had survived the hard winter with minimal losses, and the calves born that spring were healthy and strong. Catherine's garden produced abundantly, and she was back to selling vegetables and preserves in town, now with baby Peter in a sling against her chest. The women of Cody had warmed to Katherine considerably. Vivian Caldwell had left town in the spring, moving to Denver, where she'd reportedly caught the attention of a banker's son. Without her poisonous influence, the other women welcomed Katherine into their circle, admiring her work ethic, her beautiful baby, and the obvious love between her and Preston. On a warm evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching Peter grab at his toes and make happy gurgling sounds, Katherine leaned against Preston's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it? Advertising for a mail-order bride instead of courting someone local?" "Never. Not once." "Why?" "Do you regret answering?" "No. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't. If I'd stayed in Pennsylvania, kept working at the laundry until I was used up like my mother." She shuddered. "I owe you everything, Preston, my life, my happiness, our son. Everything." Preston turned her face toward him. "You don't owe me anything, Katherine. We saved each other. I was withering out here alone, just going through motions. You brought life and purpose and love. We're partners, remember? Equal partners." "Equal partners," she echoed, kissing him softly. Peter chose that moment to fuss, and they both laughed, the moment of seriousness broken by the demands of parenthood. As Peter grew through that first summer, Preston marveled at how each day brought new developments. The baby learned to smile, to laugh, to reach for toys and objects with increasing coordination. He had Katherine's green eyes and Preston's dark hair, and already showed signs of a determined personality, squawking indignantly when he didn't get what he wanted immediately. "He's going to be stubborn," Katherine observed one afternoon as Peter refused to nap, fighting sleep with increasing frustration. "Wonder where he gets that from," Preston said, grinning as Katherine swatted his arm. "I am not stubborn. I'm determined." "Uh-huh. Is that what you call refusing to let me help you with the laundry, because you insist you can manage it yourself even though you're still nursing and sleeping 4 hours a night? That's different. That's being capable. That's being stubborn." But Preston kissed her temple affectionately. "Though I love that about you. Your strength, your determination to handle everything yourself. Just remember you don't have to. That's what partners are for." Katherine softened. "You're right. I'm still learning that, learning to accept help, to rely on someone else. It's hard when you've spent your whole life knowing you could only count on yourself." "I know, but you can count on me, Katherine. Always." Autumn came again, the second autumn of their marriage. Peter was 6 months old, sitting up on his own and making attempts at crawling that mostly resulted in him going backward or spinning in circles. The ranch had done well enough that Preston hired another hand and bought additional land, expanding their grazing territory. As they prepared for their second winter together, Katherine felt profound gratitude for how much her life had changed. 2 years ago, she'd been trapped in Pennsylvania, working herself to exhaustion with no hope of anything better. Now she had a home, a husband she loved deeply, a son who brought joy to every day, and a future full of possibility. One evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, she told Preston she was pregnant again. His reaction was even more joyous than the first time, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her carefully, mindful of the baby in her belly and the one playing on the floor at their feet. "Another baby. Katherine, this is wonderful. I thought you might worry it was too soon." "Peter is still so young. It's perfect. They'll be close in age, able to play together, and we know what we're doing this time. Well, we know a bit more anyway." He set her down carefully. "Are you happy about it?" "Very happy. nervous but happy. I love being a mother. I love our family. She touched his face tenderly. I love you, Preston. I don't think I say that enough, but I do so much. I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love someone. He kissed her deeply, and Peter made an irritated sound from the floor as if annoyed at being left out. They broke apart laughing and scooped him up, the three of them holding each other close while snow fell softly outside. The winter was milder than the previous year, and Catherine's second pregnancy progressed smoothly. By spring, she was large and uncomfortable again, but more confident this time. When labor began in early May, she was calm and focused, and the birth went much faster. After only 6 hours, Martha handed them a squalling baby girl with a shock of dark hair and lungs that suggested she'd have no trouble making her needs known. "A daughter," Preston said wonderingly, looking at the tiny girl in his arms. "We have a daughter." They named her Margaret Grace, called her Maggie from the start. She was different from Peter from the beginning, more content and easygoing where her brother had been fussy and demanding. Peter was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly, bringing her his toys. With 2 children, the house was busier and louder, but Catherine wouldn't have changed it for anything. She'd grown up in a home shadowed by poverty and her father's drinking, where children were seen as burdens, more mouths to feed. Her own mother had loved her children but had been too exhausted to show it much. Catherine was determined to be different. She showered Peter and Maggie with affection, played with them, sang to them, told them stories. Preston was equally devoted, coming in from the fields to spend time with the children, teaching Peter about animals and nature, rocking Maggie to sleep while singing off-key lullabies. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growing. Peter learned to walk and then to run, getting into everything with typical toddler curiosity. Maggie grew from a placid baby into a cheerful little girl who followed her brother everywhere. Catherine's garden expanded each year, and her preserved goods became so popular in town that she could barely keep up with demand. Preston expanded the ranch steadily, reinvesting profits into land and cattle. By their 5th anniversary, the ranch had grown to over 1,000 acres with a herd of 500 head. They'd built a larger barn, a proper bunkhouse for the 4 hands they now employed, and had added 2 rooms onto the house to accommodate their growing family. On their anniversary, Preston surprised Catherine with a gift, a beautiful wooden sign hung over the ranch gate, reading Armstrong Family Ranch established 1883. Beneath it, in smaller letters, it read built on strength and love. Catherine stood looking at it, tears streaming down her face. "It's perfect." "You're what made it perfect," Preston said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "This ranch, this life, everything we've built, none of it would mean anything without you." She turned in his arms, looking up at the man she'd married 5 years ago. He was more weathered now, his face lined from sun and wind, but his eyes still held that same kindness that had made her trust him from the beginning. "Do you remember the day I arrived? How terrified I was. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever met. Coming all this way to marry a stranger, to start over in a place you'd never seen. I remember you kissing my hands. I'd spent the whole journey here trying to think of ways to hide them, ashamed of how rough they were, and you kissed them and called them strong." Fresh tears spilled over. "That was the moment I started falling in love with you, even though I didn't realize it then." Preston brought her hands to his lips again, kissing the calluses that were still there, though less pronounced now than they'd been 5 years ago. Life on the ranch was still hard work, but it was different work than the brutal labor of the laundry. "These hands built our life, Catherine. These hands tended our garden, raised our children, made our house a home. They'll always be beautiful to me." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. From the house, they could hear Peter and Maggie playing, their laughter floating on the evening air. The cattle lowed in the distance, settling for the night. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and sage. 2 more children came in the following years. Another boy they named James, and finally another girl, Sarah. The house was full to bursting with noise and life and love. Peter grew into a serious, hard-working boy who loved the ranch and the cattle. Maggie was artistic and gentle, always bringing her mother wildflowers or her father drawings. James was the adventurous one, constantly climbing things and giving Katherine heart attacks. And Sarah was the baby, sweet and charming, who wrapped everyone around her tiny finger. Katherine sometimes stood in the middle of the chaos, surrounded by her children's noise and needs, feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. But then she'd remember the silent, desperate loneliness of her old life, and gratitude would flood through her so intensely she could barely breathe. Preston understood. Sometimes he'd catch her standing still, tears running down her face, and he'd know she was remembering. He'd gather her into his arms and she'd hold onto him tightly, thanking him wordlessly for saving her, for loving her, for building this beautiful life with her. As the children grew, Katherine taught them about hard work and perseverance, about finding joy in simple things, about the satisfaction of growing food and tending animals. She taught them to read and write, to do figures, to sew and cook. But mostly, she taught them through example about resilience and love, and the strength it takes to build something lasting. Preston taught them about the land and the animals, about weather patterns and water rights, about the hard, honest work of ranching. But mostly, he taught them through his actions about respect and kindness, about the importance of keeping your word, about treating everyone with dignity regardless of their station in life. On a warm summer evening when their oldest, Peter, was 12 and their youngest, Sarah, was 3, the family gathered on the expanded porch for dinner. It had become a tradition. Sunday evening meals outside when the weather was good, everyone together. The children chattered about their week. Peter talked about helping Jesse repair fence line. Maggie showed off a new drawing she'd done of the mountains. James complained about his chores, and Sarah mostly focused on getting more of her mother's fresh bread. Preston and Katherine sat at opposite ends of the table, their eyes meeting frequently with the comfortable communication of couples who'd been together long enough to read each other without words. They'd built this family, this home, this life, together. After the meal, after the children had been bathed and put to bed with stories and kisses, Preston and Katherine sat on the porch swing, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Katherine's head rested on Preston's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked, knowing the answer but wanting to hear it anyway. "Beyond happy. Sometimes I think I must be dreaming that I'll wake up back in Pennsylvania in that awful boarding house, and this will all have been a fantasy. It's real. You're real, I'm real, the children are real. This life we built together is real." He kissed the top of her head. "And it's only going to get better. How could it possibly get better than this? We'll watch the children grow up, find their own paths. Maybe we'll have grandchildren someday. We'll grow old together, sitting on this porch and remembering all the years we've had." Katherine smiled against his shoulder. "That sounds perfect." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, an owl calling, the distant sound of the creek. The ranch spread around them, solid and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and dedication. "Preston," Katherine said after a while, "thank you for seeing me, for seeing past what I looked like, past my rough hands and plain dress and desperate situation. Thank you for seeing who I really was and choosing to love me anyway." Preston turned her face toward him, his expression serious in the starlight. "Katherine Armstrong, you've got it backward. Thank you for answering my advertisement. Thank you for being brave enough to come west, to take a chance on a lonely cowboy with a modest ranch and big dreams. Thank you for working beside me, for bearing my children, for making every day better than the last. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." "We're the best thing that ever happened to each other," Katherine said firmly. "Partners, remember, equal partners." Preston kissed her softly. "Always and forever." The years continued to unfold, bringing challenges and triumphs, sorrows and joys. There were hard years when drought threatened the cattle, or when winter came too early and too harsh. There were sad years when Martha Henderson passed away and when Jesse's father died. But there were far more good years. Years when the herd flourished, when the garden produced abundantly, when all 4 children stayed healthy and happy. Peter grew into a strong young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. At 20, he married a local girl named Emma, and they settled on a portion of the ranch that Preston deeded to him, building their own house and starting their own herd. Within 2 years, they'd given Preston and Katherine their first grandchild, a sturdy boy they named Henry. Katherine wept when she held her first grandchild, overwhelmed by the continuation of the family she'd built. Preston, watching his wife cuddle the baby while their son and daughter-in-law looked on with tired but joyful faces, felt a satisfaction so deep it almost hurt. This was legacy. This was what mattered. Maggie showed no interest in ranching but became a teacher, opening a small school in Cody for the surrounding families. She married a banker's son at 22, much to everyone's surprise, and proved that not all bankers' sons were like Vivian Caldwell had wanted. Her husband, Daniel, was kind and hardworking, and he treated Maggie with the respect and love she deserved. James, true to his adventurous nature, left at 18 to see more of the world. He sent letters from California, from Oregon, from Nevada, full of exciting stories and promises to return soon. Katherine worried, but Preston reminded her that some people needed to wander before they could settle. James would come home when he was ready. Sarah, the baby, stayed closest to home. She had Katherine's way with plants and grew the garden into something spectacular, selling not just vegetables and preserves but flowers as well. At 19, she was courted by Thomas's son, Michael, who'd grown up helping his father on the ranch. Preston approved of the match, seeing in Michael the same steady reliability his father had always shown. As Preston and Katherine moved into their 40s and then their 50s, the ranch continued to prosper. They'd built something lasting, something that would continue beyond them. The Armstrong family ranch was known throughout Wyoming Territory and beyond for its quality cattle and honest dealings. But more than business success, Preston and Katherine had built a family grounded in love and respect. Their children had grown up seeing their parents work together as true partners, seeing their father treat their mother with constant gentleness and appreciation, seeing their mother strong and capable and unafraid. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch. Peter and Emma with their 3 children, Maggie and Daniel with their 2, James, who'd finally come home from his wanderings with stories and maturity, and Sarah with Michael, newly engaged. The house was full to bursting with people and noise and love. Katherine, her auburn hair now shot with silver, moved through the chaos with practiced ease, making sure everyone was fed, that the children weren't getting into too much trouble, that everyone felt welcome and loved. Preston, watching her, felt his heart swell with love as intense as what he'd felt in their early days. Maybe more intense, actually, because it was built on years of shared experience, of weathering storms together, of building something beautiful out of nothing. That evening, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Preston found Katherine on the porch, sitting in their swing, looking at the stars. 25 years, she said as he sat beside her. A quarter century. Best 25 years of my life. Preston took her hand, the one he'd kissed on that dusty street in Cody so many years ago. The calluses were still there, though different now. These were garden calluses, calluses from kneading bread and sewing, from years of different work, but work nonetheless. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing those work-roughened knuckles just as he had the very first day. Still strong, still beautiful. Katherine's eyes filled with tears, though she was smiling. You've been saying that for 25 years. And I'll keep saying it for the next 25 and beyond. These hands built our life, Katherine. They planted gardens and raised children and helped build this ranch into what it is. They're the most beautiful hands in the world to me. I love you, Preston Armstrong. Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate mail-order bride with rough hands and no prospects. Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy with a small ranch and big dreams. He pulled her close. We dreamed those dreams into reality together. They sat together in the swing, watching stars and remembering. Remembering that first nervous meeting, that simple wedding, those early days of learning each other. Remembering the challenges they'd faced and overcome together. Remembering the joy of each child's birth, the satisfaction of each year's success, the comfort of growing older side by side. The ranch was quiet around them, settled for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and cattle shifted in their sleep. The mountains stood eternal watch, snow-capped and magnificent against the star-strewn sky. Preston and Katherine had built something lasting here. Not just a ranch, though the ranch was successful and would provide for generations to come. They'd built a family grounded in love and respect. They'd built a partnership that had weathered every storm. They'd built a love that had only grown deeper and stronger with each passing year. As they sat together in the Wyoming darkness, surrounded by the land they'd worked and the family they'd created, Katherine thought about that terrified young woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach 25 years ago. That woman had been worn down by life, her hands calloused and rough from brutal labor, her spirit nearly broken by poverty and hardship. But she'd found strength she didn't know she had. She'd found love she'd stopped believing existed. And she'd found a partner who saw past the roughness to the strength beneath, who valued work and honesty and dedication, who'd built a life with her based on mutual respect and growing affection. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, feeling her smile against his shoulder. "Everything." "Nothing. How lucky I am, how grateful. I'm the lucky one. We're both lucky. Lucky we found each other, lucky we took those chances, lucky we built this together." Preston couldn't argue with that. "Think we'll make it another 25 years, Katherine laughed. "At least. We've got grandchildren to spoil and more to come. We've got this ranch to keep running. We've got gardens to plant and cattle to raise and a life to keep living together. 25 more years sounds about right to start with." "To start with," Preston agreed, kissing her temple. "But let's aim for 50 more just to be safe, ambitious." "I like it." They sat together as the night deepened, making quiet plans for the future, reminiscing about the past, content in the present. The swing creaked gently in rhythm with their movement, a sound that had become the soundtrack of their evenings together. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren slept safely under the roof Preston had built and Katherine had made into a home. Outside, the ranch stretched away into the darkness. Hundreds of acres of land they'd worked and improved, cattle they'd raised, dreams they'd made real through dedication and partnership. Katherine's hands, still calloused after all these years, rested in Preston's. Those hands had built this life through countless small actions. Meals cooked, clothes mended, children tended, gardens planted, preserves made. Strong hands. Honest hands. Beautiful hands. Preston had known it from the very first moment he'd kissed them on that dusty street in Cody. He'd known Katherine was special, that her rough hands told a story of strength and survival and determination. He'd known she was exactly the partner he needed. He'd been right. More right than he could have imagined. She'd been his partner in every sense, working beside him to build the ranch, raising their children with love and wisdom, supporting him through hard times, celebrating with him through good times. She'd made his house a home, his dreams a reality, his life complete. As they finally rose to go inside, Preston took one last look at the ranch spread out under the stars. The sign over the gate was barely visible in the darkness, but he knew what it said. Built on strength and love. That's exactly what they'd done. They'd taken Katherine's strength, forged in brutal labor and hard times, and Preston's love of the land and dedication to building something lasting, and they'd created something beautiful. Something that would endure long after they were gone. Hand in hand, calloused palm against calloused palm, Preston and Katherine Armstrong walked into their home. Behind them, the Wyoming night continued its ancient patterns. Above them, stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Around them, the land they'd worked and loved waited for tomorrow, for another day of building, growing, living. The mail-order bride with calloused hands had found her home. The lonely cowboy had found his partner. Together, they'd found a love built on respect, forged in hard work, and strengthened by every challenge they'd faced together. It was exactly what they'd both needed. It was exactly what they'd built together. And it was exactly how their story was always meant to unfold. Two people taking a chance on each other, building a life one day at a time, creating something lasting and beautiful that would echo through generations. In the bedroom, as they prepared for sleep, Preston once again took Katherine's hand and kissed those work-worn knuckles. It had become their private ritual over the years, his way of honoring her, of showing her that he saw her strength and valued it above all else. 25 years and you're still doing that, Katherine said softly, but her eyes were bright with emotion. 25 more years and I'll still be doing it. 50 years after that, if we're blessed with that much time. These hands represent everything I love about you, Katherine. Your strength, your dedication, your willingness to work hard for what matters. I'll never stop honoring them. They climbed into bed, the same bed they'd shared since their wedding night, now worn comfortable by years of use. Preston pulled Katherine close, her head finding that perfect spot on his shoulder it had occupied countless nights. "Good night, husband," she whispered. "Good night, wife," he answered as he had every night for 25 years. Outside, the ranch settled into silence. The cattle were safe in their pastures. The horses were comfortable in the barn. The chickens roosted peacefully. The garden, Katherine's pride and joy, waited for tomorrow's sun to coax new growth from the rich soil. Inside the house, 4 rooms grown to 8, Preston and Katherine Armstrong slept in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they'd built together. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new joys. But tonight, they rested in the satisfaction of a quarter-century well spent, of a partnership that had only grown stronger, of a love that had weathered every storm and emerged more beautiful for it. The mail-order bride had come with calloused hands. The cowboy had kissed them and called them strong. And together, they'd proven that the strongest foundations are built not on softness and ease, but on hard work, honest respect, and the kind of love that sees past surface roughness to the strength beneath. Their story was one of courage. Catherine's courage in leaving everything she knew to take a chance on a new life, and Preston's courage in recognizing that true worth wasn't measured in delicacy, but in strength. It was a story of partnership, of two people working side by side to build something lasting. And it was a story of love, the kind of love that grows slowly and surely, rooted in respect and watered by shared experience. As the night deepened over the Wyoming Territory, over the Armstrong family ranch with its sign proclaiming it built on strength and love, Preston and Katherine slept peacefully. Their calloused hands remained joined even in sleep, a testimony to the work they'd done and the life they'd built. It was a fitting end to this particular day, and a perfect continuation of the story they'd been writing together for 25 years. A story that wasn't finished yet, that would continue for many more years, growing richer and deeper with each passing season. A story that began with a simple act. A cowboy recognizing strength where others saw only roughness, kissing calloused hands and calling them beautiful. And from that moment of recognition and respect, an entire life had grown. 4 children, 3 grandchildren and counting, a thriving ranch, and a love that had only deepened with time. This was their legacy. Not just land and cattle and material success, but a family built on love and respect, a partnership that honored strength in all its forms, and the proof that sometimes the best things in life come when we look past surface appearances to see the true worth beneath. Preston and Katherine Armstrong had built that life together, one day, one decision, one act of love at a time. And they would continue building it for all the years they had left, surrounded by the family they'd created and the land they'd tended, secure in the knowledge that they'd found exactly what they both needed in each other, the cowboy and his mail-order bride, the man who valued strength and the woman who embodied it. Together, they'd written a love story for the ages, one that would be remembered and retold by their children and grandchildren. A story that proved love could grow even from the most practical and unpromising beginnings when it was rooted in respect and nurtured by dedication. And through it all, through every year and every challenge and every triumph, Preston never stopped honoring those calloused hands that had first told him who Katherine really was. He kissed them each night, those strong, work-roughened hands, and called them beautiful. Because to him, they always had been and always would be. A symbol of everything he loved, everything he valued, everything that mattered in this life they'd built together.